Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back here. I was here a few years back, and I've enjoyed the service so far. So thank you for welcoming me. Appreciate it. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. To speak about nonviolence at this time, when the world is embroiled in conflict and struggle and war, is, to say the least, ironic. But it's absolutely necessary. Usually when we think of our histories, our national histories, world history, we think of it in terms of wars. We catalog wars. We say about U.S. history, well, there was the Revolutionary War, and then there was the Civil War, and then we were engaged in World War I and World War II, and the Vietnam War. We talk about wars as though they somehow plot the trajectory of human advancement. But that's all screwed up. So I'd like to ask you just for a moment today to think about what nonviolence has meant for the world and how nonviolent struggles, campaigns, boycotts, movements have really been what has helped us as a human race to advance. Think for a moment in terms of the 1930s in India, when Mahatma Gandhi began with a march to the sea to make salt. He started with a tiny group of 12, and by the time he got those 240 kilometers behind him, there were 34,000 who joined him. And the media knew about the march. A nonviolent struggle that helped the UK, the British Empire, decide it was time to quit India. Think about South Africa and the de jure and de facto apartheid that existed there before the boycotts, before the marches, before our campaigns for divestment. Led to the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions and the people living there together. Think about Nashville in the early 50s and early 60s when black people from Fisk University sat in at counters. And then people like John Lewis was amongst them. And then those students were later, after they desegregated downtown Nashville, those same students were asked to train freedom riders who went throughout the South. These kinds of movements have been successful. Yet when we think of war, can you think of one that concluded with lasting peace? Wars don't do that. Wars lead to winners and losers, and winners and losers beget only more hatred. We see it. We see new so-called freedom fighters born every day in the Gaza, right? And we can understand it. But when there are resentments and bitterness after conflict, there's no peace. Think of one war that has ended in a lasting peace. I don't think there has been yet. Martin Luther King said, either we're going to learn to live together, or we're going to die together as fools. So I come to you today representing the sort of Buddhist tradition, but also the Black Baptist tradition, and being a person who comes to this love of nonviolence, if you will, through personal experience. I'm going to show some slides soon that talk about my experience with the 1963 Birmingham campaign. Because I didn't do anything like, so you just kept breathing. That I was there, I was 15. I lived in a mining camp outside of Birmingham, Alabama, and so when King decided to bring the civil rights movement to the city he called the most segregated city in the South, Birmingham, he'd had successes in Montgomery. He didn't have to pick 1963 to bring a new civil rights campaign. People knew about him already in most of the South, but he decided, no, we have to go to the most segregated city in the South, and he determined that that was Birmingham. I mean, he could have said Atlanta, he's from Atlanta, right? But he said no, he said Birmingham. We're gonna go and mount a campaign there. And in Birmingham, King was arrested a couple of days into the struggle, but he decided there in Birmingham he would have the children become the center of the marches. And after 4 or 5 days of the so-called Children's March, which ended the Birmingham Civil Rights Campaign, the Birmingham City Council decided they had better negotiate. So when I'm talking about nonviolence, I'm not talking about anything schmaltzy, as King might have said, nothing sentimental or anemic. I'm talking about a disciplined, strategic, well-planned out movement of like-minded beings basing their efforts on love and compassion. I want to change this. We want to make this better for all people. Based there, not in, I hate these people. Those kinds of struggles soon fizzle out or burn out the folk involved in them. So I want to show some pictures about the 63 campaign. I'm just going to ask a question because I'm an academic, you know. That was supposed to be a joke, but anyway. 1963. Why do you suppose King, having had these successes in the late 50s in Montgomery, why do you suppose 1963, the most segregated city in the South, he decided to mount a movement? 1963, why that year? He spends the first chapter of Why We Can't Wait, his book, Why We Can't Wait, talking about that year. James Baldwin talked about that year too in his letter to his nephew. He ends with the sentence to his nephew James, we both know that we are celebrating 100 years of freedom. 100 years too soon. So 1863, we've gone 100 years and nothing much tangible had changed. So 1963, he mounts the Birmingham campaign, and we children, I have to say, were overjoyed that we could do something. This is a characteristic of nonviolent movements, namely that everybody can do something. So the Children's March, we were overjoyed because children had been under attack for years, for decades, for centuries. Children throw lye in children's eyes so they couldn't go to school and learn. This was the Jim Crow South. You know, it was not only the signs over the water fountains. It was, Mama, how come we have to leave the car windows rolled up when we stop? Because mean old men will throw something through that window. And they did often. And Emmett Till's death, that horrific death, happened a year after what? Great federal changes with the Supreme Court and the 1954 decision to desegregate schools. Well, I entered school in 1954 and I graduated from an all-black county high school to which I was bused every day to prevent the integration that the federal courts had called for. Many, many books substantiate the fact that southern states went into overdrive to make sure that that law not be implemented. Children were under attack, so children were happy when King called us out. I think I just want to start showing you some slides right now. And just briefly, because I know their time is limited, I'll try to do this briefly. So the machine may need to warm up. Unlike people. Are we there? It's coming? Okay. All right. A talk for First Existentialist Congregation. Can we, no, is it going to get any brighter? Okay, let's go to the first slide, please. Okay. Oh, what a cutie. I'm 4, and on the picture I'm a little upset too. Can you see it? Yeah. And okay. I look at this picture and I say, boy, did they love us, my sister and I, with the ribbons and with the pearl watches and, and a studio photo at that. And it turns out that's why I'm angry. That's why I'm pouting. I'm pouting because in order to take that photo, us little black girls had to first get our hair straightened and then get our hair curled, because the style was you had to wear your Shirley Temple curls. Hated it. Hated it. Argued with my folks at 4, how come I have to have Shirley Temple curls? I'm not Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple, do you like my new shoes? They are made out. Those were the images we saw. No black people on the screen. No black people on my TV screen. Black people came on the Ed Sullivan show. I'm going to, ladies and gentlemen, Sammy Davis, a card came on. You could hear the hand. The sign showed a man in plaid pants holding the tube, and the caption said, "Trouble along the cable." We did not see Sammy Davis Jr. on that screen, but afterwards there was Ed again. Unbelievable. My editor said nobody will believe this, and yet it was true. So I was upset by the Shirley Temple curls, my father said, when I said, "What's the matter with me? Why am I crying?" You didn't want to have your photo made, you didn't want to go to the studio. So that's why I'm pouting. Next slide, please. Oh, my father, at his graduation in 1939, my father graduated as president of the class and as valedictorian at the same black high school that I graduated from as valedictorian so many years later, having been bused there, even though Brown v. Board of Education had gone into effect in 1954. Very proud of my father. My father wanted to go to college. He ran away from home and went to Talladega and got somebody to let him stay in their college dorm room till my grandfather came and got him and said, "Boy, you have to go to work." Got a job in the steel mills. And so my father worked in the steel mills and tells me he can remember the day he started on that job. Next slide, please. Please look closely at this photo. It's one of the last that my father took alone, my aunt tells me. He was so enamored of my mother that after this last single shot, he only took pictures with my mother. Photo coming up. But I think this picture tells a lot about a young man who's graduated, tops in his class, and goes off to work in the white man's world at a steel mill when he had dreams. So I see some tenderness in this photo. I think he's really handsome. He's a sharp looker, dapper dresser. And I also think I see a bit of anger, at the system, which he fully recognizes in this photo. Next slide, please. Here's mom and dad, good-looking couple. My father's name is Orem, my mom's name is Dorothy, and my aunt says they always took pictures together. Good-looking couple, happy. So I have to say this to students, especially, how did black people survive slavery? It's like they weren't alone, they had each other, they had community, and community helped us survive. Good thing, We're human beings. We can laugh too. Oh yeah, next slide. Okay, Easter Sunday in the mining camp of Docena. There's me, I'm about 9 or 10, I guess. I show the picture because Shirley Temple curls are still there. The ribbon's still there. I can see that white and red polka dot dress and the red socks and the white shoes, but I show the picture to show the landscape. My father and his father were so-called race men. They were responsible for the countless meetings going downtown and getting those paved, gravelly roads put in. But this picture shows the alley behind me. I'm looking back at our 3-room wooden house, and the big tree is in the back of my grandparents' home. So we lived here, and there was a neighbor, Chambers, there, and then there was my grandparents. And next to them were my aunt and uncle. And those 3 Willis families kept jobs in the steel plant. But this was a mining camp, and the mine closed when I was 2. So on my way to school, I would see black men sitting on their porches, eyes glazed over, no work. They'd been taken away by the KKK and beaten soundly, because in this community was divided by one road that separated white families from black families. And we were cautioned always, not just to not drink from the white fountain. There was one store we all went to pick up the mail, and we were cautioned about the signs. But the other thing was, we were cautioned that not to step too soon onto a white neighbor's lawn, patch of grass, because that would bring down all sorts of trouble, because a Klan area chief lived in Docena. So I show this picture to show that several years later, after I'd won scholarships to various schools, and especially in the North, and especially Ivy League schools, the Klan came to our house. And one night, in the middle of the night, burned a cross just on the other side of the gravel road at the foot of the alleyway, burned a cross in front of our door. Now everybody knew it was happening. We heard the horns. Periodically, the Klan would circle with the parade through Docena, honking their horns, and then nobody knew who was being targeted. But one night they stopped in front of our house. My father was working graveyard shift, so he wasn't there. My mother grabbed her .22 pistol and stood at the door, because in '65, when I was going off to school, they were still throwing bombs at black homes. So my mother said, get down, to me and my sister. And I was glued to the window, watching as these cars and trucks came to a halt, and these people set up a cross and lit it afire. I was watching and I was mesmerized. I was godsmacked, because there were not only men, but there were women in robes, and there were children in robes. And I thought, this can't be. I wanted to talk to them. I wanted to say to them, you're making a mistake. You're making a mistake because you're a family. And we are a family in here. In my naivete, I thought, we're the same. We're the same. Can't you see that? What's wrong? Why can't you see that? They didn't throw a bomb. After they lit this cross, they all mounted again to their trucks and their cars, and they drove away. That night we were spared. I was proud of my mother. She was ready, but we were spared. Next slide, please. I tell you, there were women and children who made up the Klan, and there were people who were proud to be members. In this photo, I think this woman is proud. Families of Klan's people. Some of the children from this time have written books. Say, my father was a mean man, except he liked those other children. He would often run to other white children and say, oh, I don't want her to be hurt by those brutes, those animals. Meanwhile, in this house, people have written, that the father terrorized my mother and myself, made my mother sew these robes, made me wear the robes. So there were women. There are a lot of women in this shot. Next slide, please. So in '63, King said, Birmingham, we go there. And Birmingham had hoses. You can see this is the Birmingham Fire Department with the water cannons. Yeah. And next slide, please. Just a few more. Yeah. And dogs. And I grew up really frightened of dogs. And then I went to Cornell. And in those days, dogs were free to come in any classroom. I had to get over being afraid of dogs. It was hard to tell people why. But I was scared to death of dogs. Alsatians, So this is a famous photo. I said to my father, show him this book, I show him this photo because it's in a lot of books about the Birmingham campaign. And because some days we went with our parents when they were off work and could go downtown. Most often we went in the school buses who came by and said, going downtown, and we kids would pile onto the buses and go downtown. But this day, my parents were there too. So there's my sister, my mother, and my father, and we were right next to this man. So I say to my father, look, Dad, this picture's, I've seen a number from different angles. This picture is famous. We're in none of them that I've seen, researching. I haven't seen us in any other photo. And my father was a cheap parent. Well, daughter, that's true. But then we weren't there to have our photos made. Still daddy. This man took a pocket knife out of his back pocket and cut that dog's throat. So you hear this growling and all these dogs around, and then policemen from everywhere came in on this man, and they with billy clubs and beat him up. And right in front of us, there's blood and all these dogs. I'm sure I'm traumatized by that, but okay. And then they took that man off, face down, spread legs, spread eagle. And later, I know we're about out of time, and later, thank you. Later, some years later, more recently, I was at the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum, which is across the street from the 16th Street Baptist Church. And I was there, and I said something, must have said it aloud, about this man, wondering what happened to him. And a woman standing next to me, black woman standing there, oh, that's my uncle. To get this resolved, I said, is he all right? She said, oh, yeah. They took him off. They beat him up real good. They kept him in jail. We didn't know where he was for about 30 days. And then they let him come home. Then he began sitting on the porch, eyes glazed over. But she said, he's okay. Just that she could resolve that was incredible. Okay. Famous photo, we're not in it. Next slide, please. The last few days, because this campaign went from April to May 5th. And the last 4 days, King said only children should march. And he said, make sure the press knows about it. So nonviolent movements are strategic, disciplined. You know, they're well thought out. King's follower says he's close. They said, Martin, this is going too far. To have those just be children, that's going too far. And the second time they said that the king was when he came out against the Vietnam War. You're going too far. But the children march. May 5th, Birmingham City Council said the words you're waiting for in a nonviolent movement. We wish to negotiate. Okay. And there are always further demands, but you're watching for a certain thing. Negotiation is the first thing. The children were successful. A year later, LBJ signed because John F.K. had been assassinated, meanwhile. Signed the Civil Rights Act a year after this, 1964. And a year later, 1965. So we children were really jubilant. We were exhilarated. Not only because we could do something, but because there was success in the offing. And we saw it soon. It may have seemed like it took a long time, like 101 years, but it came. Freedom is a constant struggle. What's important is not to give up on the struggle. Next slide, please. So, Birmingham dog. I show this picture to show a young man who's well-trained in nonviolence. And that's actually a training that all of the children who marched had to go through, a training. The buses deposited us at the 16th Street Baptist Church. No wonder that church was singled out. I hope there's no longer a wonder as to why that timing was singled out. Children were the targets. They had been, they continue to be. So, 63 happens. It's over in May. In August, there's the March on Washington. 12 days after the March on Washington, the Birmingham 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed. 12 days. It's one continuous arc of advancing and reactions. But so in the churches, we got out, we went in the 16th Street Baptist Church, and then, I say this really joking, the church ladies, the elder women in the church, screened us all. We had to sign a pledge. That pledge can be found in Why We Can't Wait. You'll see them. It was 6 pledges, and it was increased to 10. We all had to agree that we would practice dutifully and study the words of Jesus Christ, that we would show courtesy to everyone we met, that we would not lift a hand even to protect ourselves. Other pledges. And then after we had signed the pledge and given our parents' names and addresses, right, which made it binding, the women would say, now, Janice, are you ready to march today? And if I said, yes, ma'am, I'm a little scared, but I'm ready, I think, she said, okay, please take your place in line. We lined up by twos. But if she said, hey, John, you ready to march today? And John said, yes, ma'am, I'm ready. she would say, "No, John, I don't think you're ready to march today. You go sit over there and work on your Sunday school lesson. You're not marching today." And that kind of weeding us out in terms of who was going to rear up actually worked. I'm always amazed. Because if one had reared up to a nonviolent movement, you'd still be hearing about it. You'd still be hearing about it. There's a man famous here in Atlanta, Andrew Young. He used to be called Slick. That was his nickname, Slick. And Slick organized the march to Selma. And one of his last advice to people who are gathered there, he said, "I want you to do all this. Women into the middle." Then I went through this list. And he said, Slick's last words were, "If there's somebody here who feels like they're angry, let me know now." Right? Because you can't march. That was Slick, Andrew Young, aka. This young boy does not raise his arm. I could not do this. I'm afraid of dogs. I would try to at least protect myself. This young man, it seems to me, is not even trying to protect himself. This is why I call him well-trained in nonviolence. It's hard to do. It requires discipline. It requires incredible courage. So this is my favorite picture of the civil rights movement. This shows a young man well-trained in nonviolent principles. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. I think there are 3 slides left. What I want to show about this is that, as you know, I'm sure, that King marched with the sanitation workers in Memphis. And he went there 2 days before he was assassinated. And he was assassinated 1 year to the day after he came out against the Vietnam War. So there's a lot more than just the civil rights campaign at work here. Yeah, April 4th, 1967, he came out against the Vietnam War at the Riverside Church. There he had just had a meeting with Thich Nhat Hanh, and so the Buddhism and the baptism together there. But in Memphis, the sanitation workers carried signs like this. And the signs, I submit to you, state the obvious. Black men carrying signs saying, "I am a man." You can hear the "damn it" afterwards, because it didn't matter what your age was, you were called a boy, right? So the sign stated the obvious in 1967 in Memphis. The sign stated the obvious. 2 days later, King was assassinated. Next slide, please. Oh, this is my teacher. I thought, since I was going to have you as an audience, you should see my teacher. This is my Tibetan teacher, Lama Tsupten. She's sweet, huh? Yeah. So sweet. Oh, yeah. Next slide, please. That's me and him. In 74, we were in Wisconsin. It was his first trip to the U.S. Buddhism says one of the Buddhism in a nutshell verses for me. Dhammapada 183 says, this is a summary of Buddhism. Dhammapada 183. Do no harm. Practice what is good. Discipline the mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhists. So I had already heard a lot of this. By the time I met Buddhism, I had marched with King. I knew that was good stuff. Do no harm. Practice what is good. Discipline the mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. And so it was like, hearing it again was like coming home to those same rock bottom values. Next slide, please. Then in 2020, we were all made to be complicit in a murder. That is, we watched the 9 minutes and 46 seconds of George Floyd's death at the hands of police in Minneapolis. And so those signs which had stated the obvious were called on again following the murder of George Floyd, which we all witnessed. Played over and over on a loop, remember? Days at a time. Was it to send a message? Look what the state can do. Some wondered. Next slide, please. And then signs came out again. 3 young women, in response to Zimmerman's acquittal for Trayvon Martin, had founded a movement by texting each other, and then one says, hashtag Black Lives Matter, stating the obvious again. So I'm saying, well, I wonder, like Bob Dylan, how old do you have to be to keep from going through all these things twice in this lifetime? I've seen it twice. Come on. Oh, stating the obvious, Black Lives Matter. What? And you know, in the reaction, you remember the reaction? People started saying, Blue Lives Matter, Yellow Lives Matter. You know, making fun of it. Not saying that. If we recognized it, if we instituted it, if it was legal, we wouldn't need signs saying Black Lives Matter. How could we still need a sign stating the obvious? Last slide, please. I really believe that the Buddha was an activist. Not only was it a revolutionary philosophy, dependent origination and all that, but concretely, the Buddha founded an intentional community where folk of different castes in India, 6th century BC India, could join. This was a no-no. Eat food together? Oh, no. And then women, too? This can never happen. The Buddha instituted all of those things in his lifetime. In his community, folk of different castes, folk of different gender were all welcome. Sounded to me a bit like King's beloved community. That beloved community where each of us is valued, where each of us is respected, where each of us is loved, where each of us belongs. Thank you.